go to Christendom, you know my husband, Andrew Whitmore. And if you don't know him, you'll be meeting him, I think, next week, because he'll be here speaking to you guys about, I don't even know, because we don't speak about that. I have 2 kids. If you were their counselors, I apologize now. They were here last week. John is 6 and Felicity will be 4 in August. So that's just where I come from. So to begin, I thought we would begin with prayer. So we can begin in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Now as they went on their way, he entered a village, and a woman named Martha received him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. But Martha was distracted with much serving, and she went to him and said, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her to help me." But the Lord answered her, "Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things. One thing is needful. Mary has chosen the good portion, which shall not be taken away from her." So I chose that because, as Christ tells us, prayer is the one thing needed. So as a mom, I can totally relate to Martha with the anxiety and the running, and I'm sure most of you, if you really think about it, you try to identify, are you more of a Mary, more of a Martha? I wouldn't be surprised if there were a lot of Marthas in you. It's hard because you actually have to work at finding the time to pray, and it's easy just to go about your business and to keep working. If anybody was at the 9:15 Mass last Sunday, if you went to Mass last Sunday, this was the Gospel reading, so it would probably sound familiar. But Father Vaccaro spoke quite at length about how important it is to pray, because service without prayer is just work. But prayer with service becomes a ministry. And as you right now working in the camp, that's something that's really significant, because this could just be your job, or this could be an opportunity to serve and to minister and to come closer to Christ. The one thing necessary is the interior life. It's a life of prayer. It's that communion that you share with Jesus Christ himself. And so, as Jesus tells us, that will never be taken from us. It was not taken from Mary. It will not be taken from us. But sometimes we actually have to go out and look for it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the different states in life, and how your prayer life will change throughout those different stages in your life. I'll be drawing mostly from my own experience, and in those places where I don't have any experience. I talked to Father Vaccaro, so I can tell you a little bit for the guys about the priesthood, and about the prayer requirements for that. But just to give you a little idea of where I come from, and if you were counselors last year, you actually heard most of this. I spent about a year discerning the religious life before my husband and I started dating, and we got married, and now we have the 2 children. So I have a little bit of experience learning about a lot of the different states in life that you might have. So states in life typically are things that you can consider to be permanent or semi-permanent. When you get married, you take vows. Those vows are permanent. It is until death do us part. It is not a permanent character on your soul, because once your spouse dies, you are free to marry again. But for once you are married until that happens. As for priests, that there is an indelible character placed on their souls. They are changed. They are priests forever in the line of Melchizedek. So there is that permanence there. For the religious, they do take vows as well, at some point in their formation journey. So usually we say that a state in life is something that cannot change without exterior circumstances bringing it about, in the case of marriage specifically. Single life, however, we do consider it's a stage of life. Not everybody will consider a state in life, because it can change at any time. Most people do not, spend their childhood thinking about, they ask you, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be single my entire life. I never want to get married. I never want to settle down. I don't want to, I want to be by myself. Because we are not made to be alone, and we learn that from Genesis. All of us are called to community in some form, and your state in life is going to determine what that community is going to look like, whether it's going to be marriage and family life, where your community is going to be your husband, your children, and your family, extended family. If it's religious life, it's going to be the community that you are a member of, and for the priesthood, it's going to be, for the most part, your diocese, or if you're a priest within a religious order, again, it will be that order. So the states in life generally, it's about community, it's about communion, and your prayer life will change depending on what your state in life is. So as I said, I'm going to kind of walk through the different stages in life based off of my own experience, and I'll begin With high school, just very quickly. Personally, I did not actually start practicing the faith until I was a junior in high school, senior. So it was actually very late in my high school career that I started practicing the faith, so I didn't really have that much to offer you. I'm going to talk a lot about college and the single life when you're getting jobs and what your prayer life might look like then. I'll talk briefly about the priesthood, briefly about the religious life and what your prayer life will look like then, and then I'll finish with marriage and family life because that's obviously what I have the most experience with. So as I said, I'm not a convert. I was baptized Catholic as a child, but my family did not practice. We went to church on Sundays, and that was because my grandmother forced us to. I found the faith in my high school. I went to a Salesian high school that was run by the Salesians of St. John Bosco. It's an order of religious sisters, and then the Salesian priests are Don Bosco Prep. That would be the male counterpart. So they really created my prayer life. I was kind of raised in the faith by them. So it should come as no surprise that my prayer life as a single person actually looked very much like their prayer life as a religious, though I didn't realize that until I actually discerned with them about a decade later. But those years of high school were really about figuring out what prayer even was and what having a prayer life meant. I didn't have the guidance of my family because they were not practicing the faith at that time. Since then, my mom also practices, so we have that in common now, but we did not have it when I was actually in the home. The biggest difference for high school to college for most is going to be the fact that in college, most of you are going to be living on your own. You're not going to be in your home anymore. You're not going to have your parents potentially making sure that you go to Mass every single Sunday, that you go to confession regularly, that you do all of those daily prayer opportunities. When you live in a Catholic household and with a Catholic family, those things kind of come naturally. And it's a great foundation for those years when you were removed from those homes and are kind of thrown out into the world to kind of fend for yourselves. College, that's what it is. College is a battleground. I don't know if it is. I went to a Catholic college. Now Andrew has his experience teaching at Christendom. I had a beautiful opportunity going to a Catholic college where I was able to, I could go to daily Mass. We had a chapel right on campus. We had tons and tons of clubs depending on what your interest was. We all prayed together. We did liturgy of the hours together sometimes. We did confession. There was opportunities for adoration. There was spiritual direction. All those things were offered right there because it was on campus. So I imagine most of you who go to Christendom will probably have a very similar experience. But those of you who go to secular universities, community colleges, you won't have that experience. And prayer and your faith life can become very, very difficult to uphold. I saw more than the amount of girls and mostly girls. I went to an all-girls high school, so most of my friends were girls. I saw a lot of them lose their faith when they went to high school, when they went to college. A lot of them went to secular schools and they thought that their foundation that had been laid in the home would be enough. And a lot of them went to college thinking that. And, it started off as, I don't need to go this week, I'm too busy. And then suddenly it was, I haven't gone in the past month. Well, I don't really feel that bad, so maybe I don't have to go anymore. And, I haven't been to confession, so I don't really need to do that anymore. And, they come home for break, and all of a sudden they're not the person they were when they left, and you don't recognize them anymore, and you don't have that faith life in common. College can be very, very difficult because you are responsible for your own prayer life at that point. Up until then, you might have had family members who told you what to do, but for the first time, most likely, you're going to have to make those decisions yourself, and you're going to have to commit and to make yourself do those things. And there are ways to make that easier. Definitely find those people who share your faith values. Even if you go to a secular university, there are always other people who share your, if you look, chances are you'll be able to find at least one person who shares your faith. A lot of secular universities will have college campus ministry programs. So go see, if your school has one, go seek them out for sure, because that's going to be your first place where you're going to find people who believe the same thing that you do. Because I will say, a lot of people go in feeling very confident. It's much easier to lose your faith than it is to hold on to it when you're surrounded by people who don't think the same things you do. It's kind of sad to say, but it's absolutely true. When you're surrounded by people who don't think it's important to go to church, aren't Catholic, so they don't do confession, they don't do adoration, they don't do all those things, if they're not doing it, it's going to be that much harder for you to do it yourself, because there are always going to be other things you can be doing. You know, it's going to be really hard on a Sunday when you want to go to church and your friends are like, oh no, we're going to go mini golfing, don't you want to come with us? And you're like, well, it's 6 p.m., I was supposed to go to church right now, so what do? Do I go to church, or do I go with all my friends? And what will my friends think if I don't go to church, if I don't go golfing and I choose to go to church? So it's hard to hold on to those things, which is why I would definitely encourage you, once you're on campus, find the campus ministry program, find somebody who shares that faith, or if you can't find them there, then try to find somebody in your own community back home, somebody that you grew up with. Hold on to those friendships, because you can always hold each other accountable. And so much of holding on to your faith is having people who share it and who know you and know what you believe and will support you in that. If you have friends who support you, it's that much easier to hold on to the faith. So if you have friends who will support you and who might even practice the same as you do, you'll have that in common, and it will strengthen your friendship, and it will also strengthen your own faith. In my case, and in the case of any married couple, that's going to become your spouse. So, I had friends growing up, but at this point in my life, Andrew is that prayer partner, that accountability partner that I cling to, because he knows my prayer life inside and out. He knows what's going on, what kind of prayer I tend to engage in, which ones speak most to my heart, and he can tell if I skip, because I'll be home instead of out somewhere. And of course, we talk about it. So college, it's also a beautiful time though, because for me at least, and I think for a lot of people in your late teens, early 20s, there's a lot of freedom, and that can be used for good. That freedom can be used for good. I found a lot of the prayer forms that I liked most while I was in college, because I made a lot of new friends, and they introduced me to new things. I was introduced to the charismatic movement and prayer and praise, and that was something I like to sing, so that was something that spoke to my heart, the ability to sing. Andrew was dragged to a praise and worship session when he was in college, and I think he considers it his own personal hell. But for me, it's how I find God. So obviously, from one person to the next, your prayer life could look very different. Certain aspects of it could look very different. You will probably find me singing prayer and praise in the car. Andrew could never do that. He will be praying his prayers, doing his devotions, but those are ways that we pray differently. So college is a really great opportunity as you meet new people and you grow in your faith to learn who you are, and because who we are really does determine how we will pray in some ways. Those of us who are drawn to music will be drawn in that way. Those of us who are drawn to writing might be drawn to journal. So your prayer life can change. It will change. It always changes. Throughout my life, my prayer life has changed so much. And some things that I said that I would never stop doing, I've stopped doing because it didn't really work with my current state in life. And some of it is just adjusting and adapting and moving with your life as you are currently living it. So after college, I actually did spend some time discerning with the Salesians of St. John Bosco. So I learned about their religious, it's called a rule of life. It's what they follow on a daily basis. It's how they pray. So religious life is interesting because it's a top down. Whereas college, it was all about you really needed to be very firm because you had to be making those commitments and making those choices. When I entered, all of that was given to me. It was handed down, and they said, "This is our life. This is how we live it. These are the times that we're in the chapel. These are the types of prayers that you are going to pray. This is when we generally do it, and you're expected to do it, barring illness or if the superior gave you permission specifically. For instance, I was a softball player through college, so I coached their team, which meant sometimes I was given permission to skip evening prayer. I would do it on my own because I might be at a game or something. But for the most part, your prayer life is given to you, and it's just a matter of actually engaging in it and in actually putting your heart into it. Because obviously you can pray and not mean a word of what you say. But in some ways, being in the religious life actually made prayer very, very easy because it was given to us. And throughout the formation process, we did have a superior who checked with us regularly to make sure that what she was seeing on the outside was a reflection of what was actually on the inside. So, it wasn't just about are you going to your rosary every day? Are you doing mass every day? Are you doing morning and evening prayer every day? Are you doing those kinds of things? It's, are you actually praying them? Is this really an opportunity are you encountering God, or are you just, going through the motions? And that was always an opportunity to actually discuss those things. So that's one of the beautiful things about the religious life in particular. It's something that I absolutely loved. It was something that, I had been raised with, and so I think it should come as no surprise that it was something that really spoke to my heart. And as a result, really made it very difficult later in my life, which I'll talk about in a little bit, because the religious life the prayer life of a religious sister is nothing like the prayer life of a new mom. It's like the exact opposite. So there's a definite learning curve, which I'll talk about later. As far as the priesthood, I talked to Father Vaquero just to get an idea of what's required here in the Diocese of Arlington. Obviously, if you're a priest in a religious order, it will depend on what that religious order gives you as a rule of life. But here in the Diocese of Arlington, they are highly encouraged to go to say Mass or to participate in a Mass every day, though it is not required. It is highly encouraged. They are supposed to do a regular confession. They're supposed to have a yearly retreat. Father Vaquero gave me all the notes. So. Liturgy, the hours, are supposed to do 5 hours. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Divine Office, but it, periodically throughout the day, so morning, evening, and night are the most common, but then there's also the Office of Readings, there's mid-morning, mid-afternoon, so there are different hours. So here in Arlington, the priests do say 5 of those hours, and then they're committed to a yearly retreat of 5 days and a yearly convocation with the bishop. So that's something that all priests in the Diocese of Arlington do. In addition, they tend to do a holy hour every day, a rosary every day, monthly spiritual direction and confession, and a biannual priest day of reflection. So those are things that are given to them. So again, the bishop kind of gives it as this is what is expected. And from diocese to diocese, that might look different, but based off of that, I would say it's probably pretty standard across the country. So as I said before, after I discerned the religious life, I left after about a year. It was just enough time for me to really get a good understanding of what the religious life was all about, and then to discern that it was not my vocation. So I left and I came home and I worked, and my husband and I actually met. We had already known each other previously. We were both in a wedding party, so we were brought back together, and we dated for 10 months. We were engaged for 10 months, and then we got married. And I will say at the beginning, your prayer life doesn't really change all that much. When you're single, you can pretty much, you create the prayer life that fits with your schedule. So for instance, I was a youth minister and a director of religious ed before I moved here. And so my prayer life, there was a holy hour before I went to work. I had Mass as part of my work day because our priest thought that was significant. Anything that I felt I wanted to have in my prayer life, I could fit in because I was only responsible for myself. I was an adult, I was able to take care of myself, and I had no other things that I needed to take care of that would prevent me from praying on a fairly regular basis. And when Andrew and I got married, that really didn't change all that much because, we were both adults, we were both able to take care of ourselves. The only thing that did change was we identified some of those prayer forms that we actually did have in common, and we started praying them together. So Andrew and I personally, every night, because for us as a couple, Andrew's not, I'm going to say it. Andrew's not a morning person. So I don't know if any of you have ever had him for a morning class, but he's a night owl. So he likes to stay up really, really late, and then he likes to wake up late, as late as physically possible and still be on time for wherever he's going. I am a forced morning person because my children don't care. So they wake up at a certain time and I have to be ready regardless of how I feel. So I go to bed pretty early because my kids are up pretty early. So we generally pray right before I go to bed because we actually do have different bedtimes. So early on in our marriage, we found the one time that we shared in common, and we committed to keeping that time of prayer every single night before I went to bed. We would gather, we'd come together, we would pray, we would talk about our day, we would just it was just an opportunity to just connect without the kids being there yelling in our ears. So that was something that we started even before John was born. Was every night we would come together and we pray the prayers that we had in common, rather than praying them separately. We started doing them together, and some of those prayers have now been introduced to our family. But it was having kids that really threw me for a loop, because all of a sudden there were people in my house who had their own schedule and had their own lives and needed me for everything and didn't care that I was, that I really liked doing a holy hour, and if halfway through that holy hour somebody needed to be fed, I just needed to throw aside my holy hour, put it on pause, take care of them, and come back. And it's hard. I'm going to tell a story. I didn't research it ahead of time, so if anybody knows who the saint is, you can tell me, because I don't remember who the saint is. But I absolutely love this story, because she was a mother, and she was a wife, and she must have been rich because she had a chapel in her house, and every day she and her sister-in-law would go in and they would say morning prayer together, and they would sit. And this one particular day, they went and they kneeled together and they were praying their morning prayer, and her husband yells her name. And she jumps up, she goes to him, he's like, I need my coat. And she goes and she gets his coat, she gets him situated because he's on his way to work, and then she goes back to the chapel, she kneels back down, and she continues morning prayer. And 2 seconds later, her husband's calling her name again. She jumps back up, she runs out to the hall. He's like, I can't find whatever it is he's looking for. And so she goes and she helps him find it. And then she comes, sits down, and at this point, her sister-in-law is kind of staring, and she's like, how are you not getting mad at this point, because you've been interrupted twice? But they continue praying, and then again, he calls her name, and she jumps up, and she runs out, and this time he's like, I just wanted to give you a kiss before I leave. And so, they say goodbye, he goes at the door, she finally kneels, and her sister-in-law says, how can you be interrupted so many times and still have such a look of peace about you? And so her response was, my vocation is to be a wife and mother. That is how I serve the Lord. So I will do that first, and the Lord will take care of the rest. And he will always make sure that there is time for my prayer. And when she looked down at her morning prayer, all of the letters on the page had turned to solid gold. So it was kind of just a suggestion to her that what she had said was true. So Google, if you like the story, Google it. Let me know who the saint is, because I want to say it's Saint Rita or Zita, something like that, but I don't really remember. But I love the story, because I love the idea that she kept coming back, which was important. Like, she didn't give up the first time and say, forget it. This clearly was not meant to happen, and I'm going to, forget about it, and it's not part of my life anymore. But she joyfully served her husband because that was her vocation. And so, your vocation as a married or married person, as a mother or father, is you are there to to serve your family, to serve your children, to serve your husband, your wife, to love them, to be Christ to them, and so that your prayer life you can't have your prayer life get in the way of that, because the prayer life of a religious is not going to be the same as the prayer life of a married person. So when I tried to force my religious life prayer into my life as a married person, and specifically as a new mom, it did not work. It's kind of like shoving the square peg into the round hole. It's not going to happen. So I will be honest. About 4 months after my son was born, I was working for the church still, and I was doing some youth ministry program, and somebody asked me about prayer, and I'm like, I don't think I've actually prayed since my son was born. I go to Mass still, and I go to confession still, because those are external things that are happening here on the property. But I haven't prayed at home at all, and my husband and I have not prayed at all. We've just been so overwhelmed and so just completely thrown by life as a new mom, as a new dad. We're sleep deprived, and I went home to my husband and I told him, I was like, this needs to change. We need to sit down. We need to go back to those commitments that we made before John was born, and we need to figure out what our prayer life is supposed to look like now that we are married and with children. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about what that meant for me. So I enjoy doing a holy hour. It is impossible, at least when your kids are young, to do a holy hour unless you can get rid of them. So Sash, you know where I was last week. But when they're around, you cannot commit to an hour, especially in a church. I mean, it's asking for trouble. So what I did was I sat down and I asked myself, what are those prayer forms that are most important just in general, because there are certain forms of prayer, liturgical prayer specifically, communal prayer, that are really just non-negotiables, which that should be obvious which ones I'm talking about. I needed to be going to Sunday Mass. Because I was a youth minister and I actually worked on Sundays, I had always made the commitment to go an additional day, because it's kind of different when you go to Mass while you're actually working. So I was committed to doing an additional Mass during the week. Confession, I needed to make sure that was happening. I needed time with Jesus, so I knew I needed to do adoration. And then I wrote down those prayers that were most important to me, that I felt like I got the most joy and peace out of, which personally was journaling, it was song, and it was reading, so scripture and spiritual reading. So those were the things that I felt were most important personally. So when it comes time for you guys to make that list, whenever that list comes to be, that list will look different for each person, because we're all different, and we all pray different because we're all different people. And so for me, I wrote down those lists. I figured out how much time each of those activities took by themselves, and then I spread them out throughout the day. So rather than doing one holy hour from like 8 to 9 p.m. or whatever, it was 10 minutes here, it was 5 minutes there, it was 15 minutes there. I figured out exactly how much time I needed to do it, and then I looked throughout my day and I identified those 5, 10, 15-minute increments where I could slip it in. So as a mom with littles, my son does quiet time, my daughter she still naps, and so that was where a lot of my prayer went. And they go to bed pretty early, so I made sure I identified those times where I would have the most amount of time to myself to pray, and then those other things that are smaller, I kind of scattered throughout the day. So personally, toothbrushing was a great opportunity to reflect on the day's gospel. So I would sit and, while I'm brushing my teeth, and I would just scroll on with brushing and scrolling, and I would read through the day's gospel, and I would pick out whatever sentence really, I would do kind of a Lectio Divina. I would pick out the phrase or the sentence that really spoke to me, and then I would just do a quick copy and paste on my phone. The phone is like, a mom's best friend. Because I didn't have time to be handwriting these things, and it was always on me, because you go everywhere with your phone, including the bathroom. So even while I'm brushing my teeth, I would read it, I would quick copy and paste it into a journal app, and then later in the day when I had a more solid amount of time, I would go back to that phrase and I would continue to reflect on it. I would pray about it. And I fit in this way. We are in the car a lot, so I decided, rather than just listening to random music, and I love country music, but I decided to commit to at least a certain amount of time per day where it would be we would pray a rosary. So now we all pray a rosary together in the car, and we do that while we're there. We listen to podcasts. The kids have their podcasts that they listen to. I have my podcast that I listen to when I'm alone in the car, which isn't often, but as often as I can. I do it. I did commit, and my husband makes sure so much of it is about communicating to your spouse what your needs are. And personally, I needed time away from the house, away from the kids, and so my husband lets me go out every single evening without, if I need it, it's there. If I choose not to do it because I have friends coming or I'm going somewhere, that's fine. But I have a 30-minute time period where my husband will drop everything. If the kids are sick, if they need whatever's happening, he will take care of it. So I can go out and I go for a walk and I listen to my podcast and I pray and I do. And that was something that we talked about and that we were able to work out together because I needed that time. And so much of married life is really just figuring out what do we each need and how can we help the other person meet those needs. And so, I told my husband that I need to exercise, whether it was running or walking. And so he said, every day after Felicity's in bed, you go out, you do those things. He made sure that, when it got cold, we bought a secondhand treadmill so that I would be able to continue downstairs. And that was just, it was a priority for us, and so we made sure that it happened. I always have, Formed is a great, we have it at the parish, it's a beautiful thing. If only because you can have it on your phone, and so I always have a book, and so if I have 5 minutes while the kids are playing on the playground, if they're just occupied doing something, and I can just sit and quick pull it up, and I can get even 5 minutes of spiritual reading in, I will do it. But I found those things that were important to me, and I made sure that they fit. And I also gave myself the grace to let go of those things that didn't. And, with the understanding that maybe eventually when my kids are grown, I will be able to go back to a holy hour. Eventually, that would be I would love to be able, on at least a weekly basis to go and drive to the church and spend, a full hour in front of the Blessed Sacrament. To go back to daily Mass on a daily, actually daily Mass. But I am slowly introducing the kids, since you guys are at Mass, you will see John and Felicity are there with me. And it started as 1 Mass a week, and then it was 2, and then it was 3, and we've just slowly over the years kind of built up, without pushing them too far. I found ways to fit those important prayers into my life, and also to let go of those things that didn't quite fit into my life as a new mom, knowing that one day, I could go back to them, or I could not, depending. The last thing I will say is, your prayer life does change. The longer you're married, the longer you're religious, the longer you're a priest, you're growing, you're maturing, you're developing, and so you shouldn't be surprised that your prayer life will also. And some of that is external circumstances, like children, like jobs, whatever. But sometimes it's interior, and it's just, you feel called to, to do something else. So, just recently, Father Vicario has been amazing, and has been talking so much about, the power of the Rosary. And I'll be honest, the Rosary was not my favorite prayer. It was like my least favorite prayer. It did not make it on my list when I made that list, 6 years ago. The Rosary has always been something that I struggled with. But the more that I learned about Our Lady of Fatima, the more that I listened in Mass to, what Father Vicario was sharing and the other priests, I decided that was something that I wanted to include in my life. And so I made the changes that were necessary to do that. I used to just journal freehand, whatever came to mind, I would write about it, but eventually I was like, no, you know what, I really want to reflect on the day's readings. And so I let go of the free form, because I always have the opportunity to just talk in my head to God when, there's nothing going on. I was like, I'm not going to waste it writing, Dear Jesus, the kids really bothered me today. I was already thinking that. I don't need to write it down. So I stopped doing that kind of journaling, and I started reflecting more seriously about, the scripture for the day and the readings. And there's so many awesome apps for doing those kinds of things. Your prayer life will change, and it will change as you grow. It didn't really come as a surprise. Well, it did. Originally, it was a surprise, but as I thought about it, I realized it makes total sense. Over time, my husband and our prayer life has become more and more in sync. And there are some things I don't think will ever change. I don't think my husband will ever listen to praise and worship music. But now we pray Rosary together, because that's something that we now have in common that we did not have in common when we got married 7.5 years ago. So over time, our prayer lives have kind of synced more. And I don't know if that's because of the children, because they do tend to, they either drive you apart or they drive you together. And you have to choose to let them drive you together. So, the more we were concerned about family prayer, the more my prayer life began to image his, and in some ways his began to image mine, because really it was those prayer forms that are best for children. And we began to see that more. And then also just married life by itself. If you're spending and giving yourself as fully to your spouse as we are called to, that will inevitably change your life too, because that's also part of the the graces of the sacrament, and the two shall become one, and we are becoming more in sync and more one in our prayer life. So it has changed a lot, but it's beautiful. It's beautiful to see those changes and to see the fruit that comes as a result of those changes. It's beautiful to see now that my kids love praying rosaries. They don't love it. They like it. They don't complain the way that I complain a lot. They don't complain. Especially now that they have their own little special rosaries in their books and stuff. Felicity especially, she's like, pray. I need to look at my book. So I'm seeing the fruits of our efforts in the lives of our children. And there's really, as a mom, there is nothing more beautiful than seeing your children being raised in the faith and embracing the faith as their own, and encountering Jesus Christ in a real, though simple and innocent way. There's just nothing beats it. It's beautiful. So that's all I have. I don't know. I have no idea what time it is. I'm really bad at it. No. I think I should be about where we are. But do you guys have any questions? You can just tell me when to stop. Does anybody have any questions about prayer, any form of life, now or in the future? Yep. Oh, okay. sorry, there's two. We'll start first and then second.
Okay, is journaling, I know you said you stopped, but is journaling still like a good idea?
Personally, I love journaling. I'm a writer. Actually, by trade, I mentioned this, but I do write for art. I write articles. I'm currently in the process of writing a book. So that's something that I've always been drawn to. So because it's a skill set that I have honed and used and turned to, it doesn't come as a surprise that that's also the way that I communicate. But it kind of changes depending on what it is that I want to write about. But journaling, I love, as especially if you're somebody who tends to communicate through the written word. It's a great way of praying. All right. Yep. What? Okay. So is that it? Okay. One last question. Oh, sure. Is that? Yeah. Okay.
Wait,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. I got the thumbs up from Chris. So
Okay.
we're good.
Did your prayer life change at all when you were dating? And if it did, like, how did you adjust?
Yes, it did. I think everything was good because it eventually did kind of, we tried to change to make ourselves more like the other, but it was kind of like a more forced, like I would invite him to charismatic Eucharistic adoration sessions, and he would go and then he would sit with his he'd be sitting there praying his rosary while I was praying next to him. And so, we try to it was, when you're dating, you want to make the other person happy. And so you're willing to make a lot of sacrifices, to do that. But as we continued in our dating and then through our engagement and now through our marriage, it has become a nice blend of who we are as individuals and then also who we are as a couple and as a family. And so we've kind of seen our life. So I do not drag Andrew to praise and worship sessions anymore, but that because now he doesn't need to impress me as much as I forced him to do it originally. But yeah, it did just a little bit. And the more time we spent together, especially once we discerned that we were marrying one another, which happened pretty quickly. At that point, we already started anticipating a life share together, and so we started even just dreaming about what that prayer life would look like once we were living together even. All right, so are we good? Or is there one more question? Anybody have anything else? Okay.
I want to make a couple of observations just to point out what she's been talking about. Even though when you have kids and everything, things are crazy, dude, let me tell you, it's 2 a.m., the kid won't stop crying, they're 4 months old, you don't know why they won't stop crying, and you're just bouncing, and you're pacing back and forth, and you don't know why the kid won't stop, but they just won't. Maybe, and then that's where that back and forth goes, maybe it's here, you hold the crying kid while I sleep for an hour and a half, and then we switch off. My wife and I used to take turns sleeping in on the weekends. She would take Saturday, I would take Sunday. But I think it's safe to say with most people, we have more time than we think we do.
Yeah, new babies even make more time because there's nothing you can be doing that's going to keep you awake at 2 a.m. besides, doing a little bit of spiritual reading or Andrew pray a decade of the Rosary every time, whatever.
Or something.
It makes more time.
Sometimes and then you're so exhausted.
More time.
You're still bouncing when you're not holding the kid. You're like, oh, I'm still doing that, okay. But, in the scripture it says, our treasure is where our heart is and everything. So we know what our priorities are by what we put time into, right? So if I want to be an athlete, a professional athlete, I want to play in the NFL. I think my window has passed, but let's pretend. Say I'm from a young age, all I'm going to do is football. I'm going to be training, I'm going to be lifting weights, I'm going to be sprinting, I'm going to be doing all the things I need to do to play football, right? So when I'm in school, even off season, I'm going to play in other sports just so I can stay in shape. Everything I do is going to be geared to, every spare moment I get is going to be about football because I want to get drafted, right? Okay. So one thing I noticed with Shannon's talk, and it's beautiful, is that even amidst everything being a parent that takes away your time to do things, she's still fighting to try to get that little bit of time with Jesus, right? She's just like, if I want to be a football player, I'm going to take every moment I can, spare moment, to practice. If I really make prayer that much of a priority, I'm going to take the spare moments I have, just to pray a little bit. Even if it's like, hey, all right, gotta go, you know? So that's, and of course our lives, we get busy, it changes, our responsibilities change. And I think it was a great story with that saint, that you always fulfill your vocation first, because we all want to do amazing things and do all this, but I think that's a really beautiful thing of what she said, is just like, no matter what you're doing, you can still fight to find the time to pray. Because you can't have a relationship, like if you never talk to Andrew, how would the marriage be?
There wouldn't be much of a marriage.
Yeah, without the communication, without just that sitting down to talk or whatever. And sometimes that check-in is over like while one's holding the crying baby and the other is just, maybe you're able to talk. One of my kids had colic, and we had to put them on the couch and run a vacuum cleaner right next to the couch, and that would stop them from crying. I don't know why, but just the vacuum cleaner right next to them, and then as soon as it would turn off, they'd start shrieking again. So that one spot on the carpet was so darn clean, I can't even tell you. But yeah, like what we make a priority in our life, we're gonna find time for, right? So, and there's so many things that pull our attention. So whether it's you're in college and you've got your schedule, or you're in high school, you got your class schedule, you got your obligations, everything, like, how can you make that prayer a priority? Just the way she's fighting with her responsibilities as a mom with kids that are young. It's tough when they're young. They try to climb over the pews. I had a kid that like low crawled under the entire pews from the front to the back one time. He was like, good job, kid. I think it was Noah. He's not here kid. So, but I mean, it's like, it's tough. So find the ways to make it at least take a couple of minutes, you know, just to say, hey, we're still here, right? Okay, good. Awesome. I'm done. I don't want to totally overlap, but I just thought that was a beautiful observation, just that you're still working at it, fighting to spend time with that person. So thank you very much for speaking.
My pleasure.
Awesome times.